When the atomic bomb was dropped on Japan, many called it an atrocity, yet a necessity with no good alternative to end the war. But what if there was? And what if it involved a small-town dentist, 1,000 frozen bats, napalm, and a Japanese village in the middle of the Utah desert? This was a plan to burn Japan from the inside out. This was Project X-Ray. Dr. Adams is a dentist from Pennsylvania. After filling his last cavity for the week, he visited the Carlsbad Caverns, a massive cave complex and World Heritage Site in New Mexico, best known for its bats. He sat down in the cavern's dedicated amphitheater just to watch 17 different species of bats dancing through the air. On his drive back home, he was still thinking about all those bats when his daydream was interrupted by an emergency broadcast on the radio. Pearl Harbor was attacked, and America was scrambling for an appropriate answer. And that's when Adams had an idea. Let's send the Japanese some bats on fire. It sounded absurd, but the final concept was way more refined. First, we take over 1,000 bats and freeze them to induce hibernation. We glue napalm with a time fuse to their chest. Under the cover of darkness, a bomber flies over Tokyo and releases our bat cage. At 1,000 feet altitude, a parachute deploys and the cage opens. The bats scatter and instinctively hide in the tiniest, inaccessible places in the city. Then their timers run out, unleashing a 22-inch flame that lasts for 8 minutes. Adams was sold on his own idea, so he wrote to the White House. Now, you'd expect the president to ignore such a bizarre proposal from some random dentist, right? Wrong. President Roosevelt actually replied, "This man is not a nut. It sounds like a perfectly wild idea, but is worth looking into." So how the heck did he manage to get presidential approval on this one? The closer you look at the weapon and the target, the more it makes sense. Here's why. They chose Mexican free-tailed bats. And these little creatures were basically nature's perfect kamikaze pilots. They can survive at crushing altitudes of over 10,000 feet. They're allegedly the fastest animal on Earth horizontally, clocking speeds over 99 miles per hour. And at just 3.5 inches long, they can squeeze into the tiniest nooks and crannies imaginable. And best of all, they always roost right before dawn, giving you a predictable timer for when those bombs would detonate. Now let's take a look at the target. Japan has a scrap and rebuild culture, where homes were treated like disposable goods with intentionally short lifespans. So their residential houses were made out of wood, paper, and bamboo, just waiting for a spark. Just put yourself in the boots of a Tokyo firefighter. Your radio explodes with reports. Not one building on fire, not 10, but thousands of blazes erupting across the entire city at the same time. Where would you even start? Anyways, long story short, the government greenlit the bat bomb. The Air Force took control, and Adams suddenly found himself promoted from small-town dentist to military project leader tasked to end World War II. Next, Adams had to assemble a team for his project, and what he put together was unconventional, to say the least. So first he hired a mammologist and an animal physiologist, but then things got weird. He also recruited some Avengers misfits, namely a filmmaker, an actor, and a lobster fisherman. The dream team was formed, and some of them even enlisted in the Air Force, where they were instantly promoted by Adams. The team began testing, and initially they planned to use white phosphorus in their tiny bombs. But then a chemist joined the team and pitched them on his latest creation, a sticky, gel-like substance called napalm. It was a game changer. The team conducted many tests where they had to handle hundreds of bats with their bare hands, so it's a miracle no one got rabies. But during one test, disaster struck at an army base just 15 miles from the Carlsbad Caverns. Armed bats were accidentally released during testing. The bats found their perfect hiding spot, which happened to be directly under a fuel tank. And you can guess what happened next. Suffice to say, Adams and his motley crew were immediately fired. and the military decided to bring in actual professionals. First, the Navy took over, but then quickly handed the hot potato to the Marines. Then it was time for the big final test. The military constructed an entire fake Japanese town in the Utah desert. We're talking full commitment here. Hibachi stoves, futons, etc. The chief of incendiary testing was generally impressed. His report showed that regular incendiary bombs could start about 400 fires per bomb load. The bat bomb? A whopping 4,748 fires. But despite these bonkers projections, the military pulled the plug in 1944 for 3 practical reasons. First, the bat bombs wouldn't be combat ready until 1945. Also, the project already cost the equivalent of $35 million today. But the number one reason was that some other guys in lab coats were working on something called the atomic bomb. Nevertheless, Adams still defended his idea of the furry Air Force. He insisted it could have devastated Japan just as effectively as the atomic bomb, but with significantly fewer civilian casualties. Now, I wish I could say that animal bombs were a one-off, but actually they have a long history. While we made bat bombs, the Brits worked on rat bombs. And even more than 1,000 years ago, Ukrainians successfully used sulfur strapped to birds.